Assalamualaikum. Hi everyone, my name is Akmal. I'm from the History Department, Faculty of Humanities, University of Indonesia. This is a little presentation I made for my research for the International University Symposium on Humanities and Arts 2020. It's entitled State Repression Towards the Press in the Guided Democracy Era, the Case of Pandji Masjarakat and Gema Islam 1959 to 1966. So, many scholars have pointed out how the Sukarno administration in this period had been authoritarian, including to the press. But I think Pandji Masjarakat and Gema Islam are special cases, because both are cultural magazines, not the kind of printed media with clear political affiliations, which anyway was also not a strange phenomena at the time. The central figure behind both magazines, Hamka, had his share of political career, representing Masyumi in the Konstituante, but he was also not your typical politician. After the dissolution of Konstituante and later Masyumi, Hamka stayed away from politics and focused on his job in Pandji Masjarakat. Now, this simple timeline would help us to understand what happened with Pandji Masjarakat and Gema Islam. Pandji Masjarakat was quite successful, but it only lasted for 32 editions before being banned by the government in 1960. In early 1962, another magazine was published, and it had a very similar style, approach, and layout with Pandji Masjarakat. In this magazine, namely Gema Islam, Hamka was listed as a staff. In January 1964, Hamka was detained on charges of treason and conspiring with Malaysia, and Gema Islam went on hiatus for 3 months. Hamka was released from the detention 2 years later, when Sukarno was no longer in power. My research questions would be about why was the government being repressive towards Pandji Masjarakat and Gema Islam, and how did they manage on doing it? Naturally, this study uses historical methods, and I would observe how Hamka expanded his influence and utilized both magazines to disseminate his thoughts to oppose the government. So now I shall speak further about Pandji Masjarakat. In my opinion, Pandji Masjarakat is rather an idealistic work. Hamka succeeded to gather so many prominent thinkers and prolific writers to contribute in this magazine. It was actually a reading for the intellectuals, discussing heavily on philosophy. However, as shown in these graphs, Pandji Masjarakat had also been accepted with the general public. Its total circulation had always risen. The editors also mentioned several times in the magazine that they had planned to print at least 30,000 copies, but they were unable to do so because there was a national crisis of paper at the time. So, as I mentioned before, Pandji Masjarakat was indeed a cultural magazine. However, many of its contents had serious political implications. Take this first article, for example, written by Daeng Pesa, entitled The Failure of the Chinese to Rule in Indonesia. This article speaks about history, but it highlighted the Chinese as enemies. At the time, the communists in Indonesia had always been working closely with China. The next article shown here, Our Democracy, written by the ex-Vice President Hatta, is actually a harsh criticism on guided democracy. Years later, Hamka will reveal that this particular article is the main reason for the banning of Pandji Masjarakat. After Pandji Masjarakat was officially banned, Hamka worked with some high-ranking military officers to establish another cultural magazine, namely Gema Islam. Hamka was listed only as a staff, but everybody knows that his contributions to the magazine were far more fundamental. Commercially, Gema Islam had much more success than Pandji Masjarakat. Its total circulation was stable in the level of 30,000 copies, even though the economic crisis struck the country heavily. You could see how the crisis affected the retail price, but not the total circulation number. During his time working for Gema Islam, Hamka received a rather personal attack. He was accused for plagiarism. However, when Hamka challenged the accusers to discuss in an open seminar, they did not respond. Another significant event was the contrast between Gema Islam and the politics of confrontation by the Sukarno administration. While the government was being hostile to Malaysia, Gema Islam published a number of articles sympathetic to Malaysia. After Hamka was detained in January 1964, Gema Islam showed a very different attitudes on the issue by publishing some very harsh articles about Malaysia. So now I would like to conclude my brief presentation in these three important remarks. Firstly, Hamka was indeed seen as a prominent cultural opposition figure despite his cooperative nature to the government. Secondly, Pandji Masjarakat and Gema Islam were seen as tools of the opposition movement because their articles, despite being cultural as its nature, also had political implications. Thirdly, the repressive actions against these two magazines took different forms. Pandji Masjarakat was easily banned, but the same approach could not be applied on Gema Islam. Therefore, the target shifted to Hamka. Thanks for watching my presentation. I hope you had a great time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.